It's such a pleasure to be here. Lindy and I have worked on this for at least 2 years, and now we finally have it happening. So, without further ado, I just want to also say that I'm going to go to my first slide. Why now? And to let you know that why now? Because climate emergencies are all around us. You can look anywhere in the world. It could be here, it could be in California, it could be in India, it could be in Brazil. But it's not just now that we've been working on this as museum professionals. So I want to give credit to some of the pioneers in our field, like Sarah Sutton, who has worked over 2 decades to promote climate action for museums, and also Julie Decker at the Anchorage Museum, and those wonderful educators at the Science Museum of Minnesota, just to name a very few. So what do museums and aquariums and zoos do? Well, we talk about storytelling, as Lindy was saying, and we're quite good at that. We are collaborators. We work with community, and we are partnering as much as we can in ways that you might not imagine, but we'll hear from our speakers. So let's see what we're going to do. Liz McDonald is going to walk us through a branding change at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which after 40 years might be overdue, but it also is a way to catalyze the work that they do and talk about the science behind a lot of what they do. Michael Dozeman is going to talk about the work of the Arnold Arboretum, both in terms of keeping the collection alive, thinking about its future, thinking about its past, and what that means for all of us. And Justin Crane is going to talk about the work that Cambridge 7 has done with the New England Aquarium for many, many years, but more recently, his work in thinking about the facility and the animals and the all of the, I don't know, I think it's just the animals in their care and how they need to be taken care of when there's a climate emergency or when there is normal time, if we can say that there is normal time. So that's what I wanted to say, and now we'll go to Liz. So over to you, Liz, and then I will introduce each speaker when it's time.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kathy. I'm excited to be here and to share with you how the Monterey Bay Aquarium is using our brand identity and messaging to advance ocean conservation. And really, ocean conservation is so deeply connected to climate change. And yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who the Monterey Bay Aquarium is. I'll talk a little bit about our audience and the audience research that we've done to understand what our audience really expects from us as an aquarium and as a conservation organization. And then we'll take a look at our brand refresh and see some examples of how that plays out and how we are engaging our audiences with climate change and conservation messaging. So next slide, please. So yeah, here we go. Let's talk about who we are, our audience, and what they want. Next slide, please. So this is our mission statement. Our mission is to inspire conservation of the ocean. It's pretty simple. It's pretty clear. I love our mission, and I feel like all of the staff at the aquarium are really aligned and embracing of this mission. Below that, we have our vision statement, and you can take a moment to read that. But the thing that I would really call out about our vision statement is that we have shifted a bit, not to be solely focused on ocean conservation, but really a vision that encompasses people and the ocean and ocean wildlife, all of us thriving together in a holistic way. Next slide. We also really think of ourselves as more than an aquarium. Yes, we are a public facility. We have incredible, beautiful exhibits that engage the public, but we really do consider ourselves to be a conservation organization, sort of primarily. Like, we have an aquarium because it's a wonderful tool to bring people in and engage them in ocean conservation. But really, our mission is that ocean conservation aspect. And we also have teams that are working on the policy side of things, on the education side of things, and on the science and research side of things to advance that mission. Next slide. So to talk a little bit about who our audience is, I feel pretty good about the level of reach that the Monterey Bay Aquarium has, although we're also always trying to expand and reach more people and grow that. Our audience tends to be fairly young. A pretty significant portion of them are under age 35. We have about 71 million people who have visited the aquarium since we opened 40 years ago. And we've got about 3.7 million followers across our social media channels. So we have also this significant digital audience that we reach who may or may not ever actually visit the aquarium in person. And then since the pandemic happened, we have launched a series of free online courses for parents, for learners as young as pre-K all the way through high school to take self-paced online courses about marine science topics. And since we launched that, we've had about 69,000 folks all across the country signing up for those. So now I'm going to get a little bit into our market research and data. We work with a company called Impacts Experience, and they conduct this enormous sort of attitudinal survey of the US public. And that data really helps us know sort of where we stand in public opinion, as well as what is expected from us as an aquarium and an ocean conservation organization. So this is one of the metrics that we look at, which is, does the public trust Monterey Bay Aquarium to protect and conserve the ocean? And I think the thing that's interesting to look at about this is generally this tells us, yes, they do. And that is something that has trended upward since the pandemic. I think that our digital platforms played a significant role in reaching more members of the public and being a source of trusted information for them during those times. Another question that we ask the public in this survey is, what are California's 3 most important environmental issues? And you can see from this that climate change is by far the most important that people are seeing. And I think it's also really interesting to look at that bottom blue bar, which shows where folks were in 2015 compared to where we are now in terms of thinking about climate change as a important environmental issue. So again, we've seen that has grown significantly and is definitely on the minds of folks in California. So this question tells us what issues the audience thinks that we should be focusing on. So we ask questions like, going forward, how concerned should Monterey Bay Aquarium be with X issue? And once again, we see climate change at the top of this list. The public really is looking to Monterey Bay Aquarium to be a source of information about climate change, as well as endangered species and some of the other issues on there. This is the last bit of data that I will share with you all. This slide shows where the public thinks we can actually make a meaningful difference. And here you'll see that endangered species does come up above climate change. Now, it's also really clear that those things are connected. But I think being an aquarium, people do think of us through the lens of our animals first. And so this does make sense. But animals also make really wonderful ambassadors to the public to be able to connect them to these underlying issues of climate change. So again, all this data informs our strategy, and we see that our audience both trusts us, that they are concerned about these issues, and that they think that it's relevant for us to be talking about these issues to them. So here I'm going to change gears a little bit. You kind of got that background on the research that informs our strategies, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about our brand refresh that we are rolling out. It's our 40th anniversary year, so yay. And really the refresh, in some ways, it's not such a big change or like a whole complete, redo of our brand and our look and our feel. It's definitely an update to that. But in many ways, I think of it more as like a recommitment to really being the organization that we have been for the last 40 years that has established such a reserve of public goodwill and trust. So just to give you a little bit of background on what our brand refresh process was, we partnered with Pentagram, who is a world-renowned design agency, and they've partnered with a number of other museums and institutions. And it was a very inclusive process to develop this rebrand. We actually worked with 150 aquarium staff through various surveys, workshops, feedback groups to develop these materials. Part of the process included doing retrospective and looking at the history of the brand over the past 40 years. We also did a little bit of an evaluation of other peer organizations. And we updated the look and feel, and we landed on a central brand idea that we call Ooh and Ah, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that. But now I'm going to pause for a moment and let you all take a look at my first video, which is, we call this sort of the sizzle reel, but it shows some of the ways that the visual aspects of the branding have been updated as part of this refresh. Looks great, right? um, but underneath all of those design changes that you just saw, to the colors, to the fonts, some little refinements to our logo, we do have this underlying concept called the brand idea, Ooh and Ah. And this concept is really what we use to guide both the visuals of the brand as well as the words and the stories that we tell. It's kind of like our brand North Star that everything that we do connects back to. And the key thing about Ooh and Ah is that it really puts the emotional and sensory experience of the ocean front and center. That's really the way that we first connect with the audience, is through that emotional and sensory engagement. And then once we have sort of that connection on the emotional level, we can move into speaking more specifically about some of our conservation priorities. One of the things I developed for the aquarium as we were rolling out this new branding to our staff is this sort of simple framework of how to use Ooh and Ah in your everyday, when whether you're a person on the frontline floor staff or one of our conservation team members, as well as our marketing team. So the first thing we do is consider equity. Our team uses a tool called an equity filter, which is really just a set of questions that give us a moment to sort of pause, to look at our process and look at what it is that we're trying to create, and consider, are there potentially biases we're bringing into that work, thinking about, who's in the room, who's at the table making decisions, who's not, how does it affect folks in our intended audience. So that's something that we apply at the start of projects, but also can be something that we refer to back at any point in the life cycle of a project. And this is something that the aquarium is really working to infuse in everything we do. And it kind of goes back to that new vision statement too, that really brings people into the center of our work. We try to make the tone really hopeful and passionate. We try not to do the sort of thing that gets people trapped in a feeling of negativity of like, but what do I do about it? We try to always kind of have this hopeful tone that a better world, that change is possible, and stay in that place that feels a little more motivating for folks. So once we framed things up with that sense of feeling and fascination, then we do move into our conservation priorities and connecting a message there. And again, trying to use sensory, sight, sound, touch, smell, those kinds of things to really bring the audience physically into the experience. And then we also really love to incorporate fun, humor, and wordplay as part of our brand. So here are our 4 conservation priorities. We are protecting ocean ecosystems. We are trying to end plastic pollution. We are always advocating for sustainable seafood and the transformation of our seafood system, as well as climate change. And climate change really is becoming a larger and larger focus for us. And really, those 3 other conservation priorities all are connecting back to it, because our coastal ecosystems are both being affected by climate change, as well as some of our best defenses against the impacts of it. The more we learn about plastic, the more we realize that its production is a climate issue. It's not just a pollution issue, but the actual production of plastic material is a climate concern. And also with sustainable seafood, we see that climate change and changing temperatures in the ocean are affecting where seafood can be caught and farmed. The shipping impact of seafood around the world also has climate concerns. So really, everything that we're doing goes back to climate change at the end. So now we're going to take a look at some examples of how all of this sort of strategy plays out in the kind of work that we are creating. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to look at is 2 ads from our current brand visitation campaign that's in market right now in California. And I'm going to play, there's 2 versions of the ad, one in English and one in Spanish, and we're going to play them both back to back.
When you walk through our doors, your world expands. Through the spectacle of light, a symphony of sounds, a touch of wonder that's up close and personal. When you walk through our doors, you become an advocate for the ocean, a supporter of education, a friend in sustainability. Monterey Bay Aquarium, inspiring conservation of the ocean.
Cuando entras a nuestra casa, tu mundo se expande. A través del espectáculo de luces, una sinfonía de sonidos. Un toque de maravilla que aprecias muy de cerca. Cuando entras a nuestra casa, te conviertes en defensor del océano, un solidario de la educación, un amigo de la sostenibilidad. Monterey Bay Aquarium, inspirando la conservación del océano.
So you can see in those ads how we are trying to set a positive and hopeful tone, how we are invoking the emotions of wonder and that sensory experience, and connecting back to our conservation mission. And also just to highlight some of the equity work that went in, this campaign was developed from concept all the way through execution to be fully bilingual. We had Spanish-speaking creators involved at every step of the process. We also worked with a Black-led production company to create those spots. And the family that's featured in those ads was recruited, and they are a real family that lives in LA, which is one of our target markets, and they speak both English and Spanish in their home. So it's really important to us that we involve a lot of different perspectives in the entire creative process on the back end as well as on the front end. And we're really excited with the way those ads turned out. The next example I'm going to show you is from our social media channels. So let's take a look at that video.
5 reasons why we love sea otters. Number 5, they're so fluffy. Number 4, they spin. Number 3, look at their little paws. Number 2, sea otters are vital for healthy ecosystems. Like wolves in Yellowstone, sea otters along the coast are a keystone species. By eating things like sea urchins and crabs, they control prey populations and keep kelp forests and eelgrass beds in balance. These ecosystem engineers shape habitats, fostering biodiversity, contributing to nutrient cycling, and bolstering ecotourism. Only 100 years ago, we thought sea otters had gone extinct in California, but now they're slowly recovering and nearly 3,000 can be found along our coast today. In places where sea otters are thriving, they even strengthen our natural defenses against the worst impacts of climate change. By protecting these endangered animals, we also protect our coasts and the people and animals who rely on these ecosystems to thrive. And number 1, the babies.
All right. So there again, you can see the tone is a little bit more playful because it's social media, and that's just sort of how things work on those platforms. But once again, we are trying to invoke the senses, have a positive and cheerful tone, and still deliver a conservation message. And that video is again, it's been called kind of a Rickroll of like, you bring them in with the adorable otters, and then you give them some important science and conservation messaging there. But people loved it. So the other aspects of our brand is, I'm a marketing person, so that's sort of my area of focus. But everyone at the aquarium is an ambassador of our brand, and our brand is really what the guest experiences from us at any stage of their connection or at any touch point with the aquarium. So we're also doing things with our on-site experience that also reinforce our conservation priorities. In addition to just the incredible interpretation in our exhibits, our guests can experience a retail operation that is free of harmful and unnecessary plastic. And we're working to improve that every day, where we're at the point now we've eliminated 100% of plastic packaging and hard plastic toys from our stores. All of our plush are 100% post-consumer recycled plastic. And we're really working at this point on our apparel and trying to get the plastic materials out of those products as well. When they eat in our cafe, it's again plastic free. And we're doing a very plant forward menu featuring different plant-based food items as well as sustainable seafood. And again, no, you don't find any kind of plastic beverage containers or utensils or anything there. And it even goes into our operations. We have been powered by 100% renewable electric sources since 2018. And we've made a public commitment with the Aquarium Conservation Partnership to get to carbon neutral by 2035. And we are steadily trending downward toward that. We are working on things like our behind-the-scenes procurement policy and trying to make sure that sustainability is a consideration in our purchasing work, as well as looking at our endowment fund and how that is invested and making sure that we are not making investments in fossil fuels. And again, our reach goes so far beyond our aquarium building and the visitor and the guest experience. We have education programs that are reaching children in the local area that are able to visit the aquarium for free for a field trip, as well as an educational program from one of our presenters. We're reaching folks with our online courses. We are also working with teachers so that they can take these skills and lessons back into their classrooms and into projects at their schools. Our policy team is engaged all the time with state, federal, and even global legislation to try to advance our conservation priorities and make a meaningful difference. And really what we can do in those spaces is present the science and help advocate that the folks who are leading us make decisions that are based on good science and are going to be beneficial for the ocean and the people who depend on it. Our seafood program is very engaged with industry partners too, in helping not only help consumers choose sustainable seafood that they can eat, but actually working with folks all the way through the supply chain to change the business practices so that they can be more sustainable. And then, of course, we do have all of our original science and research programs, like our Sea Otter program that is helping rescue, rehabilitate, and release sea otters in the Monterey Bay area. We have a program where we have tagged white sharks in the wild, and using that data, we can learn things about the way climate change is affecting the ocean, and a number of other research initiatives that we have going on. So there you have it. That is how the Monterey Bay Aquarium is using our brand and our position to reach and engage audiences around conservation issues and climate change. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. That is wonderful. That's just so powerful, but also, I don't know, touchy-feely with the little sea otters. I really got a kick out of that. So thank you so much. We're going to go to Michael now, who will kind of walk us through the Arnold Arboretum, which is part of Harvard University. Michael, please.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's great to be here sharing the stage with you and Justin and Liz on the other side of the continent. Well, I'd like to go from one living collection, like the aquarium, to another one, Harvard's Tree Museum, the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, and really talk about my role as the keeper of the living collections, as a storyteller representing some 16,000 trees, shrubs, and vines from around the temperate earth, and how we are tackling these major issues that affect us, primarily climate change and even more broadly, global change. So a few stories. We're a museum. And whether you're in Dallas-Fort Worth and you're visiting the Amon Carter Museum, or you're looking at some of these Charlie Russell bronzes, whether you're looking at the type specimen of the T-Rex there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the Carnegie Museum, an incredible set of dinosaur bones there that represent the initial concept of what a Tyrannosaurus Rex is. Or maybe you're at the Getty out there in LA and you're looking at a painting. All of these are objects, and that's what museums do. We're object-based institutions, and we curate them. By my definition and many others, there are four primary areas of curation. There's how do we develop that collection? How do we, the levels of governance task, where we ask questions of what do we add, what do we subtract from the collection in order to best achieve our missions. Certainly, if we acquire them, we've got to preserve them. We also, they serve research roles. They serve ways of, we want to document those collections. And certainly, we are public-facing institutions. We're not private collections. We're public-facing. And so they are there to be displayed and to share. And so when I think about our role at the Arnold Arboretum, Harvard's Tree Museum in Boston, I think about all four of those things. And what I want to walk us through a couple examples today is how climate change and global change affect that. Just to situate where we are, right now we're up on Harvard University's main campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Arnold Arboretum is about 7 miles south as a crow flies in Boston. We are a dual institution. We are a Harvard University museum situated on Boston parkland, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. And so we are very much a private university with a very public-facing mission. Like any museum, we have galleries. You might go to the Museum of Fine Arts and you can see the wing of the Americas, and you can see each floor has a different level of talking about art. In our museum, we have different gallery spaces, different rooms, and different types of collections. And so maybe you're in the Bradley collection of rose family plants or the rosaceous plants in the springtime. You're seeing cherries and spireas and crab apples in bloom. Or maybe the Leventrip shrub and vine garden in the autumn. Maybe you're seeing some of our understory maples and close relatives in the summer. Or you're at the base of Hemlock Hill in the winter. These are all gallery spaces. And each and every one of these gallery spaces comprise objects. In our case, temperate trees, shrubs, and vines from around the world. Hydrangeas and catalpas and large Kentucky coffee trees, plants that were collected from around the world and brought to the Arboretum. We are a dynamic, diverse, temperate, woody plant collection. What do I mean by that? Well, we're constantly changing, and I'll share with that what that means in a second. We focus on plant diversity. We have almost 2,200 temperate species in our collection, and they represent temperate areas. We do not focus on the tropics or the subtropics. These are all plants that can grow outside in those classic New England winters, and they're woody plants. So these are temperate trees, temperate shrubs, and temperate woody vines. And our focus is on the pedigree or the passport information about these plants, their origins, their provenance. And those might be stories. Again, we're talking about storytelling. And so we preserve those stories. They may reflect, some of their wild origins or perhaps some of their cultivated origins. The plants and their stories, we acquire them in order to conserve them and make use of them for education and obviously for scholarship. I talked a little bit about a dynamic collection. Unlike perhaps other museums that are rather static, our collections are all about change. They're living collections. The objects themselves are constantly changing, and so are their galleries. They are out there exposed to the elements, the gallery spaces. We can't turn the air conditioning on. We can't turn the heat on. We really can't change anything about our gallery spaces. And when you think about the objects themselves, whether it's a small seedling, it's growing, it's changing, it's responding to even the day-to-day variation, fluctuations with sun going to shade to nighttime. And so everything changes. And so we lean into that change. And that leads into global change. In my line of work, while we are responding to some aspects of climate change, there are really other major issues that are keeping me awake at night and all of my colleagues, what we're working on. And I'll talk to you about that in a second. One of the things that drives us is that there are some staggering statistics. 1 out of 3 trees on Earth is threatened with extinction. These are some of those doom and gloom unfortunate statistics. And many of those trees are in cultivation here at the Arnold Arboretum. The majority of the reasons for why those trees are threatened with extinction is the loss of habitat. Oftentimes that might be to agriculture or development or introduced pests and pathogen. And certainly climate change is also a vector or something that can facilitate some of that global change. But it's really habitat loss that is the number one driver with extinction. In our own backyard at the Arnold Arboretum, we have plants that are threatened with extinction or even those that have already gone extinct, including like the Franklin tree. And one of the things that we've learned is that because things are constantly changing, we remove plants every year because they senesce, they die, they get blown over in a hurricane. We're constantly planting new ones. So we replace 2 to 2.5% of our collections every year. We have a rule of thumb and we have a mantra that the day we stop planting plants at the Arnold Arboretum is the day that our collection begins to shrink. That leads into development. We want to be thoughtful about how we develop our collections. About 10 years ago, we launched a strategic planning initiative with our director, Ned Friedman, myself, and a group of experts to do some strategic planning about what a living tree collection should represent. And not just a collection for now, but for a collection for the next decade or the next century. We wanted to think about a century-long strategic plan. And so we assembled these experts. We asked ourselves hard questions about conservation, about research, about global change, about climate change. And we created a priority list of about 400 different species from around the temperate Earth that we want to acquire. These are where they're growing. The floras of Eastern North America and Eastern Asia are prominent. So we launched that officially in 2015. We've been very busy on expeditions all over Earth, and particularly East Asia and Eastern North America. Me and some colleagues in Japan in 2018, we've launched 26 different expeditions from around the world, and then also had colleagues from over 50 other gardens and repositories and universities who have shared some of their material with us. And these are some of the dots on the map on where we have gone, or our colleagues have gone, to work with scientists in order to document these plants in nature and to introduce germplasm, seeds, that we could then grow and place into the arboretum. And that's where they came from. This is where some of them are growing now. Most of them are still in the greenhouse and nursery growing on, but we are thoughtfully developing our collection in order to respond to these aspects of climate change and global change. One of these happens to be like the paperbark maple, a plant that's well known for in horticulture or in the nursery industry, but really is represented in nature only by about a dozen different populations. And so in 2015, we had a conservation audit where we were participating with colleagues from China and the United States in order to visit about 9 of those populations, to study them, to see what's causing them to be the extirpation, and of course to introduce material that we could then cultivate in these botanical gardens and arboreta as examples of ex situ conservation. We do it local, closer to home too. Some of you who are watching and participating might be aware of the emerald ash borer, an introduced pest that came into the port of Detroit around 2000. And this is an insect pest that has decimated our native ash trees from throughout the eastern North America. It went from a genus of trees that was very secure to one that is now of conservation status and threatened with extinction. We worked with some colleagues from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Brenton Arboretum, in order to visit some of these populations, in this case in northern New York and in southern Pennsylvania, just before the emerald ash borer showed up, in order to collect seed at the population level and put them into long-term seed storage. Maybe 50 or 75 years, we'll be able to rebuild each of these populations that were completely wiped out. This occurred in 2011. Having visited these populations just about 5 years ago, they're gone. They're empty of ash. And so these are some of the things that we're responding to. So around 15-16% of our collections are of conservation concern, which is staggering, all of them showing up in blue. And so this is a major driver of something that we, as activists, in responding to the biodiversity crisis, what we can do. But I'm not always a doom and gloom person. Sometimes we want to be opportunistic. We want to think about what are the positives. And so we thought, well, is there an opportunity for us to cultivate things that over the last 152 years we were unable to cultivate? And I started looking at some of the plants and I started thinking, well, I love southern live oak. If you're ever down there in the Gulf Coast and you visited some of these large trees that have these oak trees dripping with Spanish moss and with these gravity-defying branches, I thought, well, would it be possible for us to cultivate these up here in cold New England? And so we did some sleuthing, and we found that there were some populations that had experienced cold weather before. And we thought, well, let's try it. If our winters might be getting a little bit warmer, let's try to grow some plants. But we want to be thoughtful and collect them from the northern parts of their ranges. So we visited those populations, we collected the acorns, we grew them on, and lo and behold, we actually do have some that are surviving in Boston, Massachusetts, including some that survived just 2 years ago. We had one of the coldest winters, oddly enough, in 75 years. It got down to minus 11.5 Fahrenheit, and we had these trees survive. And so while we're responding to climate change and some of the negative effects, we're also using these as opportunities to collect, to add to our inventory of collections, and to hopefully foster additional study, additional documentation, and of course, display. Some of the things that I mentioned, there's development, and that's what I've talked mostly about, but we're also responding to these crises in situ. We have one of the most important beech collections, the genus Fagus, on Earth. It's one of our nationally accredited collections. We have 8 nationally accredited collections at the Arnold Arboretum, some of the best on their kind, not just in the U.S., but around the world. And beech is one of them. We have almost 150 different plants representing 7 different species. And this is a genus that was fully secure. But unfortunately, over the last decade and a half, eastern part of the United States has unfortunately been exposed to a disease called beech leaf disease, something that we still have barely scratched the surface on understanding what is the causal agents. We know there are nematodes involved, but it's a complex. This disease showed up 2 years ago to the Arnold Arboretum, to one of the most important beech collections on Earth. And so these are things that we are having to respond to in real time in order to back these collections up, share them with others so that there is not extirpation of some of these plants in our living collection. And so to do that, we muster resources. We assemble some of the finest horticultural, arboricultural collections managers on Earth. And it means horticultural excellence, great conservation. No different than what one might do if you're preserving the rare Mona Lisa, for instance, at the Louvre. We treat our trees and our shrubs and our vines with the same level of respect and care. We document our collections. We have a team of scholars who are out there measuring and monitoring these plants and recording when they might be in flower, how large they are, all the different aspects of their health, their vitality, you name it, we write it down, we document everything. And that does allow us, those accumulated data allow us to tell certain stories. And these are some data that I pulled the other day, just looking at the last 100 years on when our star magnolias were blooming. And we can see when peak bloom occurred, and there's a variable definition, but I can estimate that in response to the earlier arrival of spring, we know that our star magnolias are flowering about 2.5 weeks earlier. Certainly there's a lot of noise, a lot of year-to-year variability, but we see these trend lines, and these are living collections, are like biological filter paper telling us how plants and other organisms are responding to, in this case, shifting climate. Certainly we do this kind of work, but we have scores of projects a year, 75 to 100 projects, research projects a year from scholars around the world who are coming to us to study our collection. And many of those over the last 15, 20 years, certainly there's been an increased bias to studying how these plants are responding to shifts in climate, shifts in change in global levels. And so we have scholars who are using our collection, our museum collection, in order to hopefully learn more about some of these plights and blights and challenges to our ecosystems, and then coming up with sometimes applied solutions, and also sharing those data and those results with others. We're storytellers ourselves. We have active educators and teachers. We also have a magazine, Arnoldia, about 115 years old, this magazine, and we use this as an opportunity not just for us to tell stories, but other museum professionals in the garden world, other scientists, landscape historians, to tell stories about trees. It's about the nature of trees. And there has been an increased trend line over the last 5 or 10 years about global change and climate change. And so we feel that it's incumbent upon us to use all the tools at our disposal in order to share and tell these stories. And of course, like I mentioned earlier on, we are a Harvard University museum situated on Boston Parkland, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, open every day from dawn to dusk, and with about 17 or 18 different thresholds and portals. And that means that we have several million visitors every year who we can share our collections with and share these stories with. And that's something that we do every single day. And climate change and global change have been important through lines of those stories of late. So I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in for that. And I'll pass it on to Kathy. Will pass it on to Justin.
One of the best places in Boston is the Arboretum, but maybe second best, maybe first, is the New England Aquarium. So Justin, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. And so again, I'm a principal at Cambridge 7, and Cambridge 7 started in 1962 when principals representing different disciplines, filmmaking, architecture, exhibit design, graphic design, entered a competition to design the New England Aquarium. And they won, and we've been working with them ever since, including renovations to their giant ocean tank 10 years ago. I'm working with them now on a long-term campus plan. And if we go back to 1969, when the aquarium opened, it was groundbreaking in a couple of ways. It was the first cultural attraction on a Boston waterfront that was going from being, that was transitioning from being an industrial working waterfront. It was also the first directed path aquarium, the first aquarium in which the architecture was built around an aquarium tank, in this case called the giant ocean tank. And about 40 years later, it was in need of repairs, partly to repair spalling concrete and also to repair details that didn't work as hoped. So when it was designed, it was the largest of its kind in the world. All the details were new and custom. We were making our best guesses as to how to design this. And so one detail was a sacrificial aluminum anode that was attached to the metal frame to prevent the metal frame from rusting. However, those anodes had deteriorated within about a year of operation. The detail also had laminated glass. We don't use glass anymore in designing aquarium tanks. We use polycarbonate or plastic windows, and we use concrete rebates that are much simpler to build and much simpler to maintain. Another key aspect of this project was making it more universally accessible. So we removed the concrete wall that was at the top of the tank to make it easier for everybody to see into the tank. We also enlarged the size of the tank windows, and we improved the environment for animals. We added new LEDs that could change throughout the day and throughout the year to more closely match circadian rhythms. And we improved the life support system within the tank. I'll give a little bit of background on what a life support system, or LSS, is. The New England Aquarium has 65 front-facing tanks and 130 backup systems that are used for clinical work, animal rescue, for growing food for other animals within the aquarium. And these are fed through inlet structures that are in the ocean. So like the Monterey Bay Aquarium, the New England Aquarium uses natural ocean water as opposed to artificial to feed its systems. In the case of the New England Aquarium, those inlet structures are located about 100 yards seaward of the building. They're brought into 2 large holding tanks totaling about 50,000 gallons. They're then filtered as needed to support the variety of animal life within the aquarium. They're pumped throughout the aquarium, and then a lot of the water is reused and filtered. That is not is disinfected before being returned to Boston Harbor. The purpose of a life support system is to create a stable environment for animals. And very broadly, it deals with, so animals emit 2 sorts of wastes, similar to us. And with apologies to the chemists and the biologists in the audience, I'm going to be very general about this. They emit carbon dioxide through their gills and nitrogen waste through the other sides of their bodies. And monitoring and keeping those at safe levels requires power, and it requires water. So conserving power and water are the 2 keys to a sustainable life support system. And power can be made can be provided in a sustainable way through using more energy efficient pumps, through the use of variable frequency drives or direct current for pumps. And then use of on-site renewables, of course, reduces carbon emissions. Liz talked about Monterey Bays being powered by renewables. We hope that someday aquariums will be able to be powered by turbine generators that are driven by wave action. And then water savings comes through robust filtration systems, denitrification systems, drum filters, though this has to be balanced with the power needs of these pump systems. And then there are 5 general practices that we recommend for aquariums and institutions to make more sustainable LSS. Reducing habitual water changes, studying water quality data to understand where to target filtration, making facilities and maintenance part of your green team, and then submetering life support systems to better understand where to achieve power savings, and then identifying the 3 largest water hogs and focusing on those. We have also given a lot of thought to how to make the other exhibits within aquariums and museums and institutions more sustainable. And we've codified this in the Sustainable Exhibition Design and Construction Toolkit. This is authored by Douglas Flandro, who's our Sustainable Design Director and an exhibit designer at our firm. It includes the Materials Exhibition Pledge, of which the Monterey Bay Aquarium is one of the signatories, and it's modeled on the American Institute of Architects 2019 Materials Pledge. And it's based on 5 different goals. So the first is support human health, for example, by avoiding harmful materials that are on the red list, which include things like PVC, formaldehyde, VOCs, supporting social health and environmental justice. And one organization that I want to call out for this is Design for Freedom, which has the goal of eradicating modern slavery from the building materials supply chain. This is much more prevalent than I think a lot of people realize right now. Design for Freedom has an excellent website with a toolkit that can be used, including with questions that we can ask to material suppliers. We should support a circular economy by designing for deconstruction, using clips and screws rather than nail and glue. All for Reuse has an excellent open source ecosystem map, and local theater and film boards are also great sources of information and salvage material from their sets. We want to support climate health. The Sustainable Mines Transparency Catalog is an excellent tool for this. We want to set energy use intensity goals for exhibits and audiovisual systems, and then tailor temperature and humidity requirements towards specific objects and exhibit cases that have the most extreme requirements so that we don't have to condition an entire space for those requirements. And then supporting ecosystem health. And this is especially important to me given the work that we do on aquariums, and Michael's just talked about how critical this is to the world today. And I'll start with a personal example from the renovations that we did to the giant ocean tank as part of the New England Aquarium. One of the suggestions from the structural engineer, Weidlinger, was to run an electric current through the metal reinforcing bar within the tank's concrete. The purpose of this would be to prevent corrosion of the reinforcing bar if it were to come in contact with salt water. However, sharks and rays can sense the Earth's geomagnetic field. It's what they use as part of their navigation system. And so we asked the question, what is the minimum amount of current within this rebar that sharks could sense without getting totally disoriented? And the aquarists at the New England Aquarium weren't quite sure. They asked their colleagues around the world, and nobody really knew the answer for sure. So we went with a different approach. We used opaque waterproofing at the concrete instead. In some ways, it's a simpler solution, but not as durable because of the limits of what we understand about how animals perceive their environments. At this point, we can design we can mimic just about any ecosystem that we want inside of buildings. And we know some kind of interesting factoids about animals that help us do this. For example, what is the swim radius of a shark? How small or big does a shark tank need to be? But I want to ask the question now of how do we design buildings to support the ecosystems that are outside of them? How do we change our perspective? And given the work that we've done in aquariums, I want to focus on how do we support our ecosystems through the way that we design exhibits. How do we acknowledge the centrality of oceans to our life? It's not always obvious. We've done work with the Friends of the Los Angeles River, and there are a lot of Angelinos that don't realize that there's a 51-mile river that runs through their city, never mind that it empties into the ocean. And so we worked with them to design a 38-foot long river rover that could bring the institution out into neighborhoods and that could also bring students on field trips. And one of their most popular portable exhibits is the Source to Sea program, which helps scholars understand the location of their watershed relative to the ocean and their place within this system. Views of the ocean are always welcome, and really pinpointing those can have more of an impact. This is an example from Expedition Blue, which is a series of pavilions that we made for the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce that were places for people to gather and interpret and engage with the importance of the ocean and the local economy. But even if we acknowledge that the ocean is there and we understand it, there's a next step that we have to take to understanding how much life there is below the surface of the water and how to support that. This is an image of Boston Harbor. Boston Harbor used to be primarily salt marsh, which is one of the most productive of biomes. And a lot of people don't realize, while even though that salt marsh, as a lot of it has disappeared, there is still a lot of life below the surface. Sand tiger sharks live in Boston Harbor, as do seal harbors, flounder, bluefish, bass. And an excellent recent example of how we can get below the water and start designing for the marine ecosystem is the Elliott Bay seawall in Seattle. This was engineered by Parsons. And biopositive design starts by researching the plants and animals that existed in a place before human intervention, supporting the animals and plants that live in that place currently while eradicating invasive species. The Elliott Bay seawall has translucent panels above the water that allow light to the water to promote plant growth. It has crevices on the wall that allow for algae growth, that is food for the salmon. And then there are rock mattresses below that provide places for animals to hide or to find food. And hard seawalls can support the flora and fauna that's native to the rocky shores of New England. Barnacles and mussels can attach to just about anything that's hard and solid, but if we want to invite the next level of animal life, we need more complicated surfaces. Animals like worms and sea stars need crevices that they can hide in to protect them from tidal action and from predators. And we also want to provide ledges at different levels between high tide and low tide as a place to capture seawater and support a special subset of ocean life, such as crabs, anemones, and sea stars. And maybe building these walls can actively detoxify our oceans. Biofusion's bi-block construction is made from plastic and netting that's been reclaimed from the ocean. We want to plant for the full ecosystem, so by putting plants at the tops of and adjacent to our seawalls, we can invite, and especially promoting pollinator gardens, we can invite insects that are an important part of the ocean's edge food chain, and it can also filter runoff from urban surfaces. And we want to restore tidal flow where possible. This is a project that we've done for Quincy's Quantum Point, and we had looked at digging out some of the original tidal creeks here with which increases nutrient flows between the ocean and the land, supporting flora and fauna on both sides, with the added benefit that earth that is cut to restore these creeks can be used on solid land to build up above rising tide. And then we want to build to reduce any harm that we might do to wildlife by shielding lights so that they're not visible from the water's edge, by using lights in long wavelengths like that will appear red or amber or orange, so they don't attract sea turtles and they don't attract as many insects. Insects are essentially the plankton of the terrestrial food chain. And by using glass that's bird friendly. And this is a technology that's come a long way in the last 5 years or so. There are now several manufacturers that make glass that has patterns in a UV wavelength that can be seen by birds, but not by humans. And I just want to end with a quote by Rachel Carson. She wrote, "Curious changes have been taking place, with many animals invading this cold, temperate zone from the south and pushing up through Maine and even into Canada. This new distribution is, of course, related to the widespread change of climate that seems to have set in about the beginning of the century and is now well recognized." And again, she wrote this in 1955. "A general warming up noticed first in Arctic regions, then in subarctic, and now in the temperate areas of northern states." So any design that we do has to recognize the dynamic nature of our ecosystems and the coast. And if we can design our exhibits in a way that encourages and is inspired by careful observation, we can reduce harm to our planet while also acknowledging nature's ever-changing nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was quite a holistic look at everything that we need to consider. And we'd like to take your questions now, those of you online who are watching, and you can put them in chat, Q&A, and we can take a look at those now. I'm happy to start off a few questions, and so I wanted to ask Justin first about how you work with your clients and whether they are now initiating the conversation about what they need. And you've shown a little bit of that with what you have for sustainable work on exhibits, but how does that process flow?
Sure. And, most of the institutional clients we work with, if not all of them, are very aware of climate change, of the impact of building and the importance of reducing that and protecting ecosystems. The New England Aquarium is hyper aware of it, partly because they're not only an aquarium, they're also a research institution. So a big part of what we're doing as part of their long-term campus plan is trying to highlight the work that the Anderson Cabot Center does. So they are actively doing research on climate change, and they can see it literally in their backyard. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the other ocean basins in the world. And so there's a lot of work they have to do, and their site is essentially flooding every time there's a king tide. So there's a lot of interest in it. What's we will start every project by letting them know what the options are for improving their sustainability. And I think one thing that we're trying to work on now is environmental accreditations for exhibits. And those aren't as highly developed as those for architectural projects. Lee doesn't really have an exhibit accreditation, and they tend to be somewhat rigid in how they do their point scoring. And so we're looking to what other organizations might be catered towards exhibit. The Living Future Institute's Living Building Challenge, they have a core certification that we're looking at doing with an institution down in Florida. And while no exhibit project has achieved it yet, we hope to kick it off by establishing what the baseline would be for an exhibit, and then trying to achieve energy efficiency that's 35% better than that. And we're also hoping that the Sustainable Exhibition Design Toolkit that I showed earlier will help kickstart the conversation about how we can focus on making exhibits more sustainable. I mean, the other key with exhibit design is that they are often meant to be temporary and updated frequently. And so there is some really interesting work that's happening now about how to make them demountable, how to make them modular, how to make them easily changed as we learn more information and we want to try to attract different visitors.
Great, thank you. I know there's a lot of work being done by exhibition designers and preparators just in thinking about the transportation of exhibitions as well, so that we can be more carbon neutral on that too. So great stuff. We have a question from Davis online for Liz. Liz, how does the equity filter inform rebranding of the aquarium?
Yeah, thanks, Davis, for the question. It's a great one. So the equity filter it's a set of questions that we use most often at the beginning of a project, but it's also something that anyone can bring in at any point of the project. And some of the questions that it asks us are things like, do our images and stories reflect the diversity of our audience? Who are we inviting to participate in the process from inception to debrief? Is the process transparent? What is the timeline of that process? Does it allow people to actually fully participate in it? And then we also think about what are the effects that this is going to have on our audiences, our stakeholders, our partners. A question we ask is this helping us make positive progress to advance equity in our organization? And we look at how is this likely to affect historically excluded communities. So in the rebranding specifically, again, it was really important to us that the campaign be fully bilingual from start to finish. The scripts were developed in collaboration in English and Spanish at the same time, thinking about like, how are these phrases going to be translated, or is this going to resonate with both communities? In terms of who was invited to participate in the process, stepping back to the rebranding itself. Again, we really worked to include a lot of aquarium staff in that. 150 different people from across the aquarium were able to provide feedback and give input in that. I think the question about access and timelines is one that we always do struggle with. I think in trying to get work done, there's always that timeline pressure. But I think using the equity filter does give us a moment where we can say, hey, we need to slow down a little bit. Maybe this timeline does need to be adjusted, because if we don't do it right, then we can have a harmful impact, or we're going to have to redo it again later. So really trying to let equity guide our timing. And I know that we have had things that have been delivered later than initially planned, to allow a little more time in the process for that. Other things that were considerations, we thought a lot about accessibility in the rebranding, looking at things like the readability of our fonts and the contrast of our colors. And we worked with both with Pentagram, who are design partners, and Prime Access Consulting, which is a group that they're experts in making museums accessible. And so we really did try to involve a lot of stakeholders in the process and slow down to really to do, to the best of our ability, the legwork that's on us in the back end of producing these things. Obviously, I think equity is something that is still an aspirational goal for many organizations. We're far from perfect, and we do make mistakes along the way. But I think what's really important is that we're trying, and we're committed to a learning process around it. And by asking ourselves these questions, it gives us space to do that sort of thinking and learning, and to try to get better and better. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. The next question I have is for Michael. And because I spent some time looking at the Arboretum's website, I know about a wonderful story of composting that has to do with a collaboration with 2 local partners. Could you tell us about that? And then I have a follow-up for the 3 of you about feeding animals and plants.
Certainly. Well, it's a great question. So many of the folks who are tuning in are familiar with compost. It's basically decomposing or decomposed green and brown material that are coming from organic material. And as an arboretum, we recycle all of our material. Not all of our trees and shrubs and vines survive and live, or we might have some dead wood in a branch. And so we generate a lot of waste. Most of it, though, because we're a tree collection, it's wood. And so it's the browns in your compost. What we don't have a lot of are the nitrogen-rich greens. And so we wanted to find a local source for that in order to balance it out. And so we went to, many of us run on coffee and beer. And so we went to a local coffee roaster. Actually, it's a family owned operation. And we have all of their coffee grounds. We actually we use our own coffee in house as well. And so all of those grounds the spent grounds go into our compost. But we also pick up what comes out of their shop, which is far more than what the Arboretum will run through. And so we add that. And we also work with a local brewery. And so breweries will also generate a lot of green waste, the spent hops, the mash and things. And so we will work with them in order to add a lot of the nitrogen-rich material to our composts. And of course, we have our own material as well, but it's great. The Arboretum runs on beer and coffee, I suppose.
That's great. That's really wonderful. And it kind of the question for all 3 of you has to do with taking the seawater or the compost materials and how you look at that and change that for the different conditions that the animals or plants are living through. And so what I had in mind here is what happens with the heat dome in California now, or what might happen to us in the winter or something. How do you change the materials of your source water or other things that feed the plants and animals? Justin, do you want to go first?
Sure. The source material for the tanks for the New England Aquarium is, as I mentioned before, is natural seawater. It's drawn from Boston Harbor. And after it's brought into the aquarium, it has to be treated for a lot of different things. I mentioned controlling wastes, but there's also, it needs to be controlled for salinity levels, temperature levels, depending on whether it's going to a tropical or a temperate or a cold water exhibit. By using natural seawater, the temperature comes in at a pretty steady level. So that helps, and it already has some level of salinity, so the amount of treating that's necessary isn't as high. But again, it does require power and water to do the treatments, to power the chillers or to power the pumps. And so again, I think a key part of creating a sustainable aquarium is how do we get the power. Renewables are best. The New England Aquarium is on a district steam system, and so one of the and I know that steam system is looking to electrify and decarbonize, and there are efficiencies there as long as they get them from renewables.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Liz next. Liz, you shared that wonderful information with all of us about how the pumps work, and that's what got me thinking about this. But how do you then change it, if you need to, when the water is warmer than it currently is in Monterey Bay?
I studied up for this a little bit before our panel by having a conversation with our director of applied water science a little bit on this, and she's also was very excited. She did her master's at Harvard and actually looked at our desalinization processes for her thesis. So if anybody out in the audience there knows Casey Regnier, shout out. But yeah, that is a concern for us when the warming ocean waters are coming in. We are seeing that. One of our most iconic exhibits is our kelp forest exhibit, and kelp needs cold water to thrive. And so that is definitely something that we are concerned about, how warming ocean temperatures are going to ultimately affect the sea life in our exhibits as we bring that in. In talking to Casey about this, the aquarium uses a lot of heat exchangers. So when we bring that water in from the bay, that's also what's controlling the climate of the aquarium overall for the guests as well. Fortunately, Monterey is a pretty temperate climate. So we all start whining when it gets to about 75 degrees if it's being too hot. So most of the time it's fairly comfortable without a whole lot of need for climate control. But yeah, basically they're using a lot of heat exchange of moving, either trying to pull heat out of the water, and they use that to heat up water for our more tropical exhibits, or to cool water down as much as we possibly can through heat exchange for our deep water exhibits. I think most of the exhibits we are, I think with the exception of Into the Deep, it is more about heating the water up, and so that that heat exchange is usually going in that direction. And then we do employ chillers for our Into the Deep Sea exhibits. But it's definitely something that we are concerned about, because it is going to require more energy to heat or cool water if we have to use sort of other methods beyond that heat exchange.
Great, thank you. And Michael, changing the chemistry of what you feed the plants.
It's a great question, and and thinking about this, and Liz and Justin's responses, I think about one of the technologies or the things that we rely on most in order to keep our objects happy and alive and thriving is soil. Plants need soil, and soil has kind of three main components. There's the mineral component, the geological component. There's the biological component. You can think of all the microbes and earthworms and things, and of course then there's the chemical component. And if you lose your soil, you lose everything. If you have a poor soil, your plants cannot thrive. And so one of the things that we've been engaged with in the last 10, 15 years is to increase soil health. And we've done a number of things. One of the things is how do we provide several million people a year access to these plants without them compacting the very soil that the plants need. And so there's a proper amount of aeration in there. And so we've done a number of things. We've directed people on mulch paths and keeping them out of beds, and with explanations on why we need to do this in order to preserve the soil. We've also, rather than mowing many of these areas and compacting it ourselves with gasoline-powered mowers, we've transitioned into herbaceous meadows or woodland landscapes that will not only aerate the soil, add additional nutrients to the soil, but also be wonderful for invertebrate pollinator diversity. And so we've been taking some active steps that we can that will preserve and improve the health of our soils, which in turn will improve the health and viability and vitality of our 16,000 plants.
Great. Beautiful meadows, too.
Yes.
Really. So we have a question from Andrew, which is for everyone, and so we'll try to get to it. It's a great question. Is the visiting public offered suggestions of how they can help with conservation of plants and animals or with climate change? Who wants to start with that?
I'll pipe in there real quick. Just
Okay, sure.
Where we advocate for trees and plants, and so we do everything we can in order for people to think about tree advocacy. How do they, in their own backyards, do what they can to increase urban tree canopy, so that we transition our urban areas from heat islands into viable, cooler spaces. And so we will provide the information and the how they can better steward these plants. And or lobby some of their elected and appointed officials to do the same.
That's great. Thank you. Justin?
Sure. Absolutely. And the New England Aquarium, which I'll do my best to speak on behalf of, does. So for a while they had a Blue Planet Action Center exhibit that offered very practical advice to visitors. Part of showcasing what the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life does is making it very clear to visitors how much research is happening, which raises issues like how critically endangered the North Atlantic right whale is. And there are practical suggestions built within the aquarium to let people know how to fight climate change and to contribute to ocean conservation. But I also want to sort of build on Liz's point with the branding and the ooh and the awe, because I think it does need to start with building empathy for the animals that are in the aquarium and in the ocean, because I think that's, in my experience, visitors don't want to be hit over the head right away with action items. They want to do something that's enjoyable. They want to grow to love the ocean or the forest, whatever it is, and then figure out how to help.
That's great. Liz, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is similar where we've actually looked at, there's a body of research done called Heartwired to Love the Ocean that really talks about how to inspire people to take action on behalf of the ocean. And that research also sort of guides us to start with that emotional and empathetic connection. So we definitely are big on that empathy building through our exhibits. But we also have a long history of having conservation calls to action in the aquarium. 25 years ago, our Seafood Watch program began with an exhibit talking about some of the challenges wildlife face due to overfishing and unsustainable aquaculture. And then we had little cards in our cafe that talked about what the sustainability of the seafood was. And they kept disappearing off the tables because people wanted that information. And so that actually was the inspiration for our Seafood Watch program, which has now been going strong for 25 years. And we have a series of sustainable seafood guides on the seafoodwatch.org website that people can pull up on their phone really easily and learn both from a species level, what are the most common types of seafood that are being eaten in the United States, what to look for, what to avoid, or regional things, because it does vary regionally in terms of what you're most likely to find on your plate or in your grocery store. And then, yeah, similarly to what Michael said, a lot of our messaging is also just educating folks and encouraging them to advocate with their elected officials and with policymakers for policies that can really make a difference, supporting things like renewable energy, protected areas in the ocean. There's a number of different initiatives out there that folks can really use their voices to support, and we encourage that.
Great, thank you all three. We have time maybe for one more question from Lawrence, and his question is for everybody, but we'll have to be quick. Do you approach funding the climate initiatives differently than you do other initiatives? And he has an example, but I think we kind of get what he means. So, Michael?
Certainly. We've had the Arnold Arboretum, 100% of it operates on past and present philanthropy. And there have been a number of initiatives that we've launched recently, including the Campaign for the Living Collections, through philanthropic support and allowing us to go out into nature to collect, to study these threatened plants and to bring them into cultivation or long-term storage. And that's been through the support of donors. They like the messaging and they want to help us achieve our goals.
Great, thank you. Justin?
Sure. So philanthropic support is a key part of it. Other funding sources related to sustainability are utility incentives. A lot of utilities want to conserve the amount of energy that they have to produce, and so we work closely with clients to determine which sustainable initiatives contribute towards sustainability. And then resiliency initiatives also are, there is federal and state funding potentially available for this. The New England Aquarium is part of the Wharf District Council, which is a collection of landowners in the financial district in Boston whose land is at risk from rising sea levels, and they've partnered together on studies ultimately to produce a cost-benefit analysis that can be submitted to the federal government for funding.
Great. And Liz?
Yeah, so the aquarium's funding model, we have revenue that comes in both from our visitors, the ticket sales and our corporate evening events, as well as donations and grants. I don't know that we have things that are specifically earmarked for addressing climate change, but I would also just say that that sustainability and caring about climate change are so core to our identity and what we do. It's almost hard to to pull it out and separate it from any of our work.
We have probably less than a minute left, but enough time to thank Lindy and the Salata Institute for our session today, and to thank Michael Dozeman and Justin Crane and Liz McDonald for being with me today. This is just the tip of the iceberg, really. And I hope we can do something like this again. So thank you all who are watching, and thank you all.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.